Hi everyone, NUSensei here. So one of the questions which I occasionally see floating around is archery a sport? And if you're watching my channel, you're probably already aware that, well, yeah, it is, obviously. Like, who would think it's not a sport? But yet some people have this misconception that archery, for some reason, can't be considered a sport. I guess in the same way that people would say chess isn't a sport because it doesn't seem physical. You're not running around or having a team to play against, and therefore it's not a sport. But let me explain. So archery is a sport, and the way people understand sports more or less is that it must involve a physical challenge, and it has to involve some kind of competition, and there are maybe other criteria. And in archery's case, it is an Olympic sport, so that should already guarantee that it's a sport, otherwise it wouldn't be in the Olympic Games. Archery does require physical activity and physical challenge. I guess this is where many people have that misconception where it's easy because you might be doing, backyard archery or shooting at a local fair, or having some of those like really weird suction arrows that kids have, and you think, oh yeah, that's just a game or a toy people use. But serious archery, like sport archery, does require a fairly reasonable level of physical intensity. And that's because archery is a strength-based sport. It's not some automatic aiming device where you just point in the right direction and let go. It requires a lot of fine, specialized training, historically and in modern terms, to use the right muscles, to engage the back, and to execute a process consistently and cleanly. And in many ways, this is very similar to other individual sports. The most obvious one is shooting. So whether it's pistol shooting or air rifle, similar concepts. You have a tool, but physically you must have the control, the dexterity, or the endurance to consistently hit targets all the time. There are other sports which demand a very specialized set of skills, like a lot of the athletic events, javelin throws, discus and hammer, for example, all require a specialized set of skills to reach your goal. And in this case, it might be distance shooting or distance throwing. And archery is, again, like these sports. It's not something which anybody can pick up and become very good at. Anyone can do it, of course. Archery is very accessible, but not everyone who does it becomes a master at archery. That's why you have that skill gap between good archers and novice archers. But having established that archery does require physical skill, it is a physical challenge, is archery only a sport? And I think this is where, by extension, we can have an even deeper discussion. What is archery to you? Now, for some people, archery is a sport. And the assumption is that when someone gets into archery, you're getting into the sport. This misconception, I think, comes from people who do archery as a sport. But archery isn't solely a sport. In fact, in modern times, archery is more commonly a sport, but it hasn't always been a sport. The way to think about archery is that it can be a sport, it can be a skill, it can be a hobby. Now, throughout history, archery started as a survival skill. You use archery to hunt for food. And that's where even today, modern hunters may opt to use bows. So in this case, archery is less of a sport and more of a skill. Now, for people who don't hunt and don't compete at the Olympic Games and just shoot for fun in the backyard, that's when archery is a hobby. So people who just casually shoot for fun aren't necessarily training to become athletes. And to do something as a sport, there is an expectation where you might have to put in a lot of hours in your routine to train your skills and train your body to use your equipment well and therefore become proficient archers. And if people aren't doing that, then you're not really doing it as a sport. And if you're not competing in rounds or tournaments, then again, it's a bit less of a sporting aspect and more of a recreational aspect. I think that's where we see that balance between skill, sport, and hobby. So some people who do it very seriously to compete would see it as a sport. People who do it to put food on the table will see it as a skill. And people who do it for fun will see it as a hobby. And again, for people who are in the archery community, do understand, respect that people do archery for different reasons. And again, parallels to this might be things like playing football compared to just kicking a ball around in the park, or playing catch compared to playing baseball. There are particular things that people do for fun, which actually aren't the sport. Archery tends to be lumped under just one name. If you shoot a bow, you're doing archery, but depending on how you do it, that might not be the sport that you're following, but just an activity you do. So again, is archery a sport? Yes, it most definitely is, but not everyone does it as a sport. Hopefully that clears it up and answers what seems like an obvious question, but it has been asked and occasionally raised. Anyway, this is NUSensei. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.